The birth of a baby, a small event that became the turning point in world history. 2,000 years ago, the Messiah arrived on earth, and only a few people saw the sign.
The only people who see the sign in the stars of the night are the people who are looking for it.
The ones who saw the sign were the wise men from the east. Their search for the King of the Jews brought them to the palace of Herod the Great.
The irony is, of course, that they have seen a star that they associate with the rising of a king over Jacob.
So who exactly were the wise men who called on King Herod, and why did they seem to know Jewish prophecy better than the Jews? Well, the answer may lie in a 3,000-year-old inscription discovered in Jordan. In 1967, archaeologists found the remains of an ancient temple in a village called Deir Allah.
On the wall of the temple was an inscription about Balaam the prophet, the same character that we know from the book of Numbers.
Balaam, the son of Beor, visited by an angel and scolded by a donkey. A freelance prophet hired to curse the nation of Israel, but instead, he prophesied the coming of the Jewish Messiah, the Star of Jacob. Only small fragments of the Balaam inscription have survived. It's written in Aramaic, and it talks about a vision of judgment from the gods of Canaan.
Totally different context altogether, an archaeological context, with a story about him that is not the biblical story, but it shows us that his reputation as a professional foreteller, prophet, existed throughout the eastern side of the Jordan, what we would call the Transjordan.
Balaam is one of the few Old Testament prophets with archaeological proof of his existence.
I think it's just exciting. It lends plausibility in one sense to Matthew's story because the people who are familiar with Balaam's prophecies are people who are coming from that side of the Jordan River.
Balaam's prophecy led the wise men to look for a star, and the star led them first to Jerusalem. This is the Tower of David, the spot where Herod's palace once stood, a place historians called wondrous beyond words. It was here that Herod summoned the wise men to a secret meeting.
The humor in the text is that they come to the king of the Jews, Herod, who does not know his own scriptures and has to ask his counselors and his advisors to go search the Jewish scriptures so that he can find out which prophecy they're talking about, while they who are Gentiles and foreigners know the prophecy of Balaam.
Herod's men found a 700-year-old clue from the prophet Micah, a scripture that led the wise men to the birthplace of the Messiah. They went to Bethlehem and found Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. They brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh, gifts that were described by the prophets hundreds of years earlier. But while they worshiped Jesus, Herod planned to kill him.
Nowadays, if we were to meet Herod the Great, we would consider that he probably suffered from severe paranoia and needed medical treatment and a good psychiatrist.
The wise men only fueled his paranoia. They were known as the kingmakers of the East, and now they were in Herod's palace, looking for the one who had been born King of the Jews. Herod saw their visit as a threat.
This is just who Herod is. He's a convert with no actual Jewish blood who is always fearful, doesn't trust anyone, loved his wife so much he killed her, loved her to death, I say.
Herod ordered a massacre in Bethlehem. Every male under the age of 2 was killed, an event that was prophesied by Jeremiah more than 600 years before it happened. Joseph and Mary fled to Egypt, a journey predicted by the prophet Hosea and fulfilled in the Gospel of Matthew.
Hosea 11:1 says, when Israel was a child, then I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. Some of the rabbis say Matthew misquoted Hosea 11 terribly. Nonsense. What was his point? His assumption was that his audience would know the whole verse. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Egypt I called my son. In other words, just as it happened to Israel, so it happened to the Messiah. You have this pattern over and over in the scriptures.
Nowhere is the promise of the Messiah more powerful than in the book of Isaiah. He spoke of a child born of a virgin, a son called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. The words of Isaiah were copied by scribes, hidden in caves, and protected for more than 2,000 years. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were rediscovered, the book of Isaiah was found completely intact.
I would say the one scroll that has had more impact upon the world than any other scroll that was found here is the Great Isaiah Scroll.
This is the oldest known copy of the book of Isaiah, and it's the only one we have today that existed before the birth of Christ.
There we have a scroll from around 100 BC that is nearly as well preserved as it was in the days it was being read. Otherwise, the next copies of the book of Isaiah come from 1,000 years later. And with this, we are going to be able to say, now and for all time, that we have the text that existed from 2,000 years ago.
From the desert caves near the Dead Sea to the ruins of an ancient temple in Jordan, the story of the Messiah was etched in stone and written on parchment hundreds of years before Jesus was born. And now the Gentiles can say to Zion, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you."